Very enlightened parents who were determined to break down gender stereotypes gave their daughter trucks for her 4th birthday. And she was absolutely thrilled with the present and took them off to her bedroom. And the parents came in, put the trucks in bed and pulled the covers up so that only the headlights were showing. Same behaviors have been observed watching chimpanzees in the wild. The juvenile female chimpanzee is cradling the stick and pretending it's a baby, whereas the juvenile male chimpanzee is whacking his friend with a stick. The argument that these differences are socially constructed certainly can't be the whole story.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Lila Rose podcast. Today we have a special treat. We're going to be having Dr. Leonard Sax in studio. We actually talked with him before in the show about boys adrift. Why is the modern world so tough for boys? Why are they struggling so much? Today with Dr. Sax, who is a family doctor, an MD, and a PhD in psychology, we are also going to talk about why gender matters. He wrote a book called Why Gender Matters back in 2005. It matters more than ever today, talking about the differences between boys and girls. We're going to talk about the research behind why gender matters and why boys and girls are, yes, newsflash, different, as well as why it has gotten so chaotic today with the trans ideology. So many young girls, over 35% of them identifying as non-straight, as queer or non-binary or as lesbian. What's driving that? And we're also going to talk about the importance and the power of intergenerational formation and development and how we've lost that as a society. I also have some hypotheses that I throw at Dr. Sax and get his response. Enjoy the episode, and don't forget to subscribe to the show if you aren't already. Support us on Locals and Patreon so that we can keep the show growing. And don't forget to subscribe to the show if you aren't already on podcast or on YouTube, and ring that notification bell so that you never miss a new episode. Dr. Leonard Sax, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me.
You were very popular, our episode with you before, talking about boys and their struggles in the modern world. But you've written a lot of other really important books, so I'm excited that we get another try at this, and thanks for coming in studio.
You're welcome.
How was the travel in?
Tiring.
Okay. Well, hopefully this will be a lively discussion that will keep us awake. All right. So for those that don't know you, maybe they haven't heard the last episode or not familiar with your work yet, give us a little bit of your background as a psychologist.
Well, I am first and foremost a family doctor. I'm a medical doctor. I earned my MD as well as my doctorate in psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. I am board certified in family medicine, and I am a practicing family doctor. I've been a family doctor for over 30 years. I have signed off on over 120,000 patient visits over 30 years' time. I'm also a PhD psychologist, which is a little unusual for a family doctor, and that has given me, I think, a unique perspective in some of the challenges that kids are facing, that families are facing.
So you've written several books, and we've talked about one that focuses on the plight of boys, but there's a couple more that I think are so timely and important. One of them is The Collapse of Parenting, a New York Times bestseller, and the other one is Why Gender Matters. You wrote Why Gender Matters. You first wrote, the first edition came out 2005. Mm-hmm. Okay, what inspired you in 2005 to write a book called Why Gender Matters? Clearly, we understand why it matters today, why we should be talking about why it matters, but what inspired that in 2005?
So when I attended public schools in Ohio, K through 12, and I vividly recall our high school honors assembly when I was a junior in 1976. The honors assembly, all the kids who'd been recognized for outstanding achievement were up on the stage, and it was all boys. The editor of the school newspaper, Andy Borowitz, was a boy. Andy has gone on to have an amazing career. He writes a column for the New Yorker magazine called the Borowitz Report. He's a celebrity. He wrote Fresh Prince of Bel-Air for Hollywood. The editor of the Poetry Journal was a boy. The editor of the yearbook was a boy. It was all boys up on stage. And there were people back then, like notably Myra and David Sadker, two American researchers, who were writing books called Failing at Fairness, How Schools Shortchange Girls, published in 1994, based on their research in the 70s and 80s, showing how all the valedictorians are boys, all the high achievers are boys, schools are failing girls. That's the world I grew up in. That's how old I am. So then I graduated from Penn with my doctorate in psychology and my medical degree. I did a 3-year residency in family medicine, and then I started my own practice in Montgomery County, Maryland, just outside Washington, D.C. in 1990. And moving through the 1990s, I was like, boy, this place is really strange, because when I attended school in Ohio, the high achievers were boys, and now I'm seeing something very different. I'm seeing families where the high achievers are girls and the boys are goofballs who don't care and are not motivated. And my first thought is, what's wrong with Montgomery County, Maryland? But then in the late 90s, I began to reach out to colleagues across the United States and back home in Ohio, and I learned this is not confined to Montgomery County, Maryland. This is a national phenomenon. What's going on? What changed over a comparatively short period of time, from the mid-70s to the mid-90s, that flipped the script so that suddenly girls were outperforming their brothers? Incidentally, it became very clear as I began to research this, the gender gap was widening, with boys falling farther and farther behind, not because girls were doing better, but because boys are doing worse. So I began to look into this, and that led to an article I wrote for the American Psychological Association 23 years ago called Reclaiming Kindergarten, Making Kindergarten Less Harmful to Boys, where I talked about how early education changed, how kindergarten used to be about duck, duck, goose and singing in rounds and going on field trips. And by the year 2000, it was all about literacy and numeracy, and how that was immensely harmful to boys. Because we now know that the language areas of the brain of the 5-year-old boy look pretty much like the language areas of a 3-year-old girl. It's not developmentally appropriate to ask a 5-year-old boy to sit still, be quiet, and learn about diphthongs for 40 minutes.
I want to stop you right there, because that's so fascinating, and most people don't know that, especially in our world that's increasingly erasing gender and the sex differences. So a little boy's brain at 5, in terms of its
the language area.
Its language
different
area.
Areas of the brain develop in a different sequence in boys compared with girls.
And girls develop earlier, is what you're saying.
And that's some areas.
In some areas, when it comes to their language.
Yeah, language, the girls are way ahead of the boys. And so I wrote this article, a scholarly paper, peer-reviewed scholarly paper for the American Psychological Association, just really to get it off my chest. And to my surprise, it was picked up by the national media. Richard Rothstein, who was the education columnist of the New York Times, wrote about it in the New York Times, and I was on television in Canada. It was the front page of the National Post, which is a Canadian national newspaper. And so I actually began to be invited to visit schools. And I had visited a number of schools in researching this question, and then I started speaking in more schools and was really struck by how the lack of awareness of gender differences harms both girls and boys. And so that led me to write Why Gender Matters.
A special thank you to our sponsor, Good Ranchers. Good Ranchers is American meat delivered. This is a company that sources 100% of its meat, poultry, fish, and pork directly from American ranchers, so you know exactly where your meat is coming from. I love the products. They're great. Their chicken's amazing. Their steaks are delicious. And there's a special deal happening right now at goodranchers.com. If you order any subscription box, you get $119 worth of free Easter ham, 10 pounds of free Easter ham that will come directly to your door. And this is prime pork that is heritage breed and humanely raised. So go to goodranchers.com today, use the code Lila at checkout, get your free 10-pound Easter ham, and get your American meat delivered. That's goodranchers.com. So since then, a lot has changed. Mostly, I would say, not so much in the status of the fact that they're different biologically, boys and girls, but in politics and culture and how we see boys and girls. Let's break down, I'd love to hear you break down for us, what are the differences between boys and girls? Sounds like very, very...
well, I have a 7-hour workshop on that for teachers where we go through all the differences and how those differences what implications those differences have for best practice in the classroom. But okay, we'll take a stab at it.
Three top differences,
well,
developmentally, behaviorally,
we'll
between
try
boys and girls.
one, and we'll see how we do with that. So I cite 12 studies in which researchers have given young children a choice of playing with a doll or a truck, basically a girl toy or a boy toy. As I said, we have 12 different studies that have done basically this. All the studies are a little bit different in how they did this and what toys they offered, but we have many, many different studies over many years, some recent, some going back 50 years, in which researchers have given little kids, 3, 4, 5, 6 years of age, a choice of playing with a doll or a truck. What do you find? You find that girls are somewhat more likely to play with dolls than they are with trucks. Boys are much more likely to play with trucks than they are with dolls. Now, this is not a new finding. 40 years ago, I took a graduate seminar in developmental psychology with the late Justin Ehrenfried at Penn, and we had a few of these studies way back then, and Professor Ehrenfried asked, why is this? Why do 4-year-old girls slightly prefer to play with dolls rather than trucks, and 4-year-old boys greatly prefer to play with trucks rather than with dolls? Professor Ehrenfried said it's because of the social construction of gender. We teach kids how to do gender, and by the time kids are 3, 4 years old, girls have learned that they're supposed to play with dolls rather than trucks, and so they do, but the girls do spend some time playing with trucks. But, Professor Ehrenfried said, we send a much stronger message to boys, that boys absolutely are supposed to play with trucks and absolutely not with a Barbie doll. And when I'm doing the presentation, I show the graph, and the boy picks up the Barbie doll and drops it like a hot potato. There's very little variation among the boys. Very, very few boys spend any time playing with Barbie dolls.
Or they use it like a toy soldier.
Or well, but in the studies that I'm citing, they just don't play with it. Yeah. I didn't question that notion of the social construction of gender, and I don't know anyone who did back in the 1980s. Back then, everyone agreed that sex differences in the play preferences of young children was due to the social construction of gender.
Why didn't anyone question that? It seems like
it seemed perfectly plausible.
It just seemed plausible.
Jarian Alexander, who was then at Yale, was the first to come up with the idea of giving the same idea to juvenile monkeys. Give juvenile monkeys a choice of playing with doll or truck. And her findings have subsequently been replicated by Kim Wallen and colleagues at the Yerkes Primate Research Center studying a different species of monkey, and as well as by Richard Wrangham and colleagues observing chimpanzees in the wild. The female monkey slightly prefers to play with dolls rather than the trucks. The male monkey greatly prefers to play with trucks rather than dolls. Now you could try to invoke the social construction of gender to explain that finding. You'd have to assert that the monkey in authority is saying something like, "Now, son, don't let me catch you playing with no doll." But this does not happen. The monkey in authority is paying no attention to the choices made by the juvenile. It makes no difference if you conduct the study in isolation or in the colony. You cannot plausibly invoke the social construction of gender to explain the fact that juvenile male monkeys greatly prefer to play with a dull gray truck rather than a colorful doll. And this finding has to be hardwired because it's observed in 4 different primates, human, chimpanzee, and 2 species of monkey. Jarian Alexander was the first to document that finding in a non-human primate and also the first to propose a plausible explanation. And it's her explanation that many teachers have found useful in creating gender-aware instructional strategies. So I do go into it in some detail in my book, Why Gender Matters. I have an appendix on this topic. It turns out, neuroscientists have known for 40 years that there are 2 visual systems in the brains of all higher primates, human, chimpanzee, and monkey. One visual system is looking for color, detail, and texture. The other visual system is looking for speed, change in direction, collision. The what system and the where system is the way they're sometimes referred to, or the parvocellular or the magnocellular, or dorsal and ventral, referring to the fact that these are anatomically separate streams of information in the human brain and in the brains of monkeys and chimpanzees. Jarian Alexander was the first to argue 20 years ago that the P system, the system looking for color, detail, and texture, predominates in females. And the M system, the system looking for speed, collision, change in direction, greatly predominates in primate males. Now, when she made that argument 20 years ago, it was a conjecture, it was a hypothesis. But over the last 20 years, we've gotten a great deal of research that provides strong support for her hypothesis. For example, Katrin Amundsen and her colleagues in Germany taking slices through HOC5, that area 5 of human occipital cortex, that's looking for speed, collision, change in direction. Find you can take a slice through the human brain at HOC5, hold that slide up to the light, and say without error whether that piece of brain came from a man or a woman. There is no overlap between the sexes. The organization of the brain is radically different at HOC5, even after adjusting for any size differences.
So just to pause here for a moment, this is separate from the structure, the fact that men are physically stronger. It's a separate from, hormone changes in the body, estrogen versus testosterone. You have more testosterone, also leads to strength, maybe more agility. This is just about brain development.
Yeah, this is about the organization of the brain. Yes, the visual system in the brain. And Jerian Alexander has read my discussion of her work, and she's given it her approval. Why do girls slightly prefer to play with dolls rather than trucks? Because girls have more resources in that part, in that visual system that's looking for color, detail, and texture. So they're more interested in things that have an interesting color, detail, and texture. Boys, Jerian Alexander asserts, have more resources in the magnocellular visual system, the system that's looking for speed, collision, change in direction. Why do juvenile males, whether human, chimpanzee, or monkey, greatly prefer to play with a dull gray truck rather than a Barbie doll? Because it's got wheels. It goes kaboom. Now, at this point, many people are thinking, okay, I can see how this might be interesting if I were a neuroscientist interested in sex differences in the visual system, but how does this help me to be a better parent or a better teacher? Well, then I cite 5 studies in which researchers gave young children a blank piece of paper and a box of crayons and said to each child, draw whatever you want. What do kids draw when you give them a blank piece of paper and a box of crayons? I have a study from the United States, from England, from South Africa, from Japan, and from Thailand. Girls everywhere draw people, pets, flowers, and trees. Typically 2, 3, or 4 are arranged on horizontal ground. Again, in the presentation, I'm showing the pictures that little girls have actually drawn.
What age are we talking here, Doctor?
5, 6, 7, 8. And the girls use 10 or more crayons for the predominance of red, orange, yellow, green, beige, and brown. The people are people, recognizably people with eyes, hair, and clothes. What do boys draw? On this parameter, boys form a bimodal distribution of variance, which is highly kurtotic and skewed, which is a fancy way of saying the boys form 2 clumps. In each of these 5 studies, about 8% of boys, so about 1 in 12 boys, draw pretty much what the girls draw. They draw people, pets, and trees. Turns out that boys who draw people, pets, and trees have a lot in common with other boys who draw people, pets, and trees. They're at least 3 times more likely than other boys to have allergies, asthma, or eczema, sufficiently severe to warrant ongoing consultation with a physician. They may be athletic, but they're not playing football or ice hockey. They're playing tennis, track, or golf because they don't like to hit and they don't like to be hit.
Is this the nerd, stereotypically?
Indeed. And they are much more likely, beginning in middle school, to become victims of bullying. Because a favorite game among middle school boys is one boy comes up to the other boy and says, hey, how about I hit you as hard as I can, and you hit me as hard as you can? And this boy says, but I don't want to hit you, and I don't want you to hit me. And he runs off and, boom, marks himself as a victim of bullying. What about the more than 90% of boys? In each of these 5 studies I just mentioned, more than 90% of boys do not draw people, pets, and trees. In each of these 5 studies, more than 90% of boys are trying to draw something radically different, a scene of action at a moment of change, like a monster eating an alien, a rocket smashing into a planet. Human figures, if present, are often stick figures. And when I do this presentation, I'm showing you these pictures the boys have drawn, stick figures lacking eyes, mouth, hair, and clothes. The boys use 6 or fewer crayons for the predominance of black, gray, silver, and blue. And again, Jerian Alexander has read my chapter, and she agrees that most girls are drawing pictures that engage the parvocellular visual system, that have color, detail, and texture. The great majority of boys, more than 90%, are trying to draw pictures that engage the magnocellular visual system, that imply speed, collision, change in direction. Well, if that's true, that implies a hypothesis, namely that if more teachers understood these differences, we could break down gender stereotypes. We could have 8-year-old boys who love to draw just as much as girls do. And then when I'm doing the presentation, I show the pictures that the kids draw, and I asked the attendees to imagine that you're a teacher and you've got second graders, and you ask them to draw whatever they want. And here this girl has drawn her and her little sister and her little kitty and her sister's friend, and the teacher's saying, "Oh, lovely, I love." Wonderful, all the color and detail and texture. Then she comes to this boy who's just drawn a bunch of squiggles, and she says, "What are you trying to draw here?" And he explains he's trying to draw a car crash at the moment of impact. This car is being crushed between these two. And the teacher says, Jason, a car crash, that's really violent. People are going to get killed or paralyzed. Look at Emily's picture. It's so nice. No one's getting killed. Why do you have to draw something so violent? And the unintended message that boy is getting is that drawing is for girls. So I was visiting a second grade classroom, and the teacher said, "Free time, you can do whatever you want." And some of the girls were sitting and coloring. And one of the boys was running around the room making a buzzing noise. And I got in his way and I stopped him. I said, "How come you don't want to sit and draw?" And he said, without hesitation, he said, "Drawing's for girls."
Wow.
Now, I'm sure the teacher never said drawing is for girls, but she might as well have, because by praising and understanding pictures with color, detail, texture, and faces, but not really getting the point of a picture that is all about action, she is unintentionally sending the message that drawing is for girls. The lack of awareness of gender differences has the unintended consequence of reinforcing gender stereotypes. Because this teacher, like most teachers, has received no formal instruction in sex differences in the kinds of pictures that girls and boys want to draw, she's got one more boy who's decided that drawing is for girls.
Big thank you to our sponsor, 7 Weeks Coffee. 7weekscoffee.com is America's pro-life coffee brand, which is gourmet, low-acid, ethically sourced, small batch, delicious coffee. You're going to love 7 Weeks when you try it. If you go to the website today and you use the code Lila at checkout, you get 10% off your order. What I love about 7 Weeks Coffee is that it's not just amazing, delicious coffee, but that it supports our values. They donate 10% of all of their proceeds, not just their profits, directly back to pregnancy resource centers. So check out 7weekscoffee.com today. Stop buying brands that are ultimately against your values or supporting abortion, and buy from 7 Weeks Coffee, which supports the pro-life movement. That's 7weekscoffee.com. So in that scenario you just shared, the boys running around, zooming around the classroom. I've got 2 little, very young boys, and they're zooming up until the moment of bedtime. I mean, they're just wrestling, fighting, jumping in the beds. I mean, they've got so much energy constantly. And, I always look at other friends who have girls, and the girl has usually less energy, the little girl. Is this a brain development thing? Is this a biological system thing separate from the brain? What is that?
I would dispute you on the facts.
Okay.
My daughter was and remains hugely energetic. And
you
there
haven't met
are
my
girls
son.
who are very energetic, and my daughter absolutely at age 5 would be jumping off the top of the couch, jumping off a 10-foot ledge onto the floor below. Actually, and when I do that part of the presentation, I show a picture of her admiring the cast, which I applied when she jumped off the top of a 9-foot jungle gym and fell on her outstretched hand and broke her wrist. I casted her wrist. So I don't accept your claim on the facts that boys are energetic and girls are less
energetic.
Perhaps
maybe I'm mislabeling it. Is it fair to say that very young boys versus young girls are more interested in wrestling and physical.
Let me finish
activities.
my comment about drawing, because that boy was running around the room making buzzing noises and not drawing because the teacher had no idea how to encourage him drawing.
Okay.
Margaret Paula Olafsdottir oversees 17 schools across Iceland, K through 8 schools, and she and her teachers know all about sex differences in the visual system and how those differences influence best practice in the classroom. She sent 44 of her teachers from Iceland to Chicago, Illinois to attend a 2-day workshop I hosted on this topic. She then sent 60 of her teachers from Iceland to Orlando, Florida to attend a 2-day workshop I hosted on this topic. And then at my invitation, she came to Houston to speak and share her experience. She did a breakout session, which I attended. And she told us that in each of her 17 schools today, since the teachers have had this training today, when the teacher says, free time, you can do whatever you want, the boys' favorite activity is drawing. Boys love to draw. Girls love to draw. I don't believe there's any innate difference between girls and boys in how much they would like to sit and draw. But there's a big difference in what they want to draw. And if you don't understand that, you end up with what we have, a country where second grade boys think drawing is for girls. When you go to the College Board website and you look to see who took, among high school kids, who took the advanced placement exam in art history last year, girls outnumbered boys by more than 3 to 1, which is ironic in view of the fact that most of the artists they're studying are men. The lack of awareness of gender differences has the unintended consequence of reinforcing gender stereotypes. If teachers don't have this training, you end up with boys running around the room making buzzing noise while the girls are coloring. And again, Margaret Paula Olafsdottir is a great believer in what she calls dare training, getting girls to run around, jump off things, walk on stones in their bare feet, because girls love to do that if you encourage them. If you understand gender differences, you can break down gender stereotypes, and the girls will be running up and down on the beach, and the boys will be sitting and drawing.
So you think that it is a gender stereotype and not a truth about gender, that, you know, small boys versus small girls are more interested in things like wrestling and
well, wrestling per se,
like
there is some evidence to
like
support
that.
your claim.
Okay.
When you're talking specifically about simulated combat, is going to appeal to boys. But
or using toys as guns or swords.
Girls can be very energetic and should be. And
it was a bad word choice.
But they channel the energy in different ways.
That makes sense. So when you see a small child, let's move from drawing to wrestling, or, you know, using a toy as a gun as opposed to what maybe the toy might be for. I see, my impression has been that is usually more prevalent amongst males. Why is that?
So indeed, in Why Gender Matters, I share a story from my own practice when very enlightened parents who were determined to break down gender stereotypes gave their daughter trucks for her 4th birthday. And she was absolutely thrilled with the present and took them off to her bedroom. And the parents came in a few minutes later, and the daughter said, "Shh, they're sleeping." She put the trucks in bed and pulled the covers up so that only the headlights were showing. And these enlightened parents likewise gave their son a doll, which he used as a weapon and as a projectile, but did not use the doll as it was intended to be used. And again, these same behaviors have been observed by Richard Wrangham watching chimpanzees in the wild. The juvenile female chimpanzee is cradling the stick and pretending it's a baby, whereas the juvenile male chimpanzee is whacking his friend with a stick. So the argument that these differences are socially constructed, while it may have some truth, it certainly can't be the whole story, because we observe this same pattern of behavior in chimpanzees and in juvenile monkeys, these same sex differences observed in other species that do not construct gender in the way that humans do.
So for the boy then that's using the toy as a projectile or as a weapon versus the girl who might take a toy that is designed to look like a weapon but, maybe nurture it in some way. What does that speak to in the sex differences biologically? Where's the biological evidence for why that's happening, those different responses?
Well, I think we can say with confidence that it is genetically programmed because it is conserved across species. It is not a function of testosterone. Juvenile males and females prior to the onset of puberty don't make testosterone. If you draw blood from a 4-year-old, there are no sex differences in testosterone levels comparing 4-year-old boys with 4-year-old girls. And so these differences clearly are, to a considerable degree, hardwired. And again, I cite an astonishing study of where researchers looked at more than 1,000 samples of human brain tissue from dead people at every age of life, including prenatal. So mother is in a car crash, she dies, the baby she's carrying dies. You take the baby out of the wound, you cut open the brain, and you test the brain tissue. That's how this study is done. And the brains of dead children and adolescents and young adults and middle-aged adults and the elderly. You look to see what genes are active in brain tissue when this person has died. And you find very little sex differences in adults in patterns of gene transcription, but huge, profound sex differences in the baby prior to birth. The biggest differences in gene transcription in the human brain is prior to birth. We are born male or female. Genesis 1:27, in the image of God, he created him, male and female. He created them. We are indeed born male or female, with some very rare exceptions. There is a phenomenon called intersex, where, so for example, an XY chimera, an individual who's a mixture of XX cells and XY cells, classically a 50-50 chimera. That individual is going to have may have a ovary on one side, a testicle on the other side, their blood an equal mix of male and female hormones. So true intersex individuals, these are exceedingly rare. Fewer than 2 in 10,000 humans are intersex. Now, the Biden administration, the United Nations, the New York Times, and many other sources will claim that no, intersex is as common as red hair, that 2 in 100 humans are intersex. That's false. And if your listeners are interested, I would refer them to my paper titled How Common is Intersex, where I show that the correct number is fewer than 2 in 10,000, and that the claim made by Ann Fausto Sterling at Brown University that it's 2 in 100 is wildly false and is based on lies. It's hard to use any other word because she's including disorders like late onset congenital adrenal hyperplasia, where you have men who look like men and can father children, and women who look like women and can bear children, who have this condition that causes acne, and she claims it's intersex because they're not perfectly male or female. Any departure from the Aristotelian perfection in her definition makes you intersex, which is simply psychotic. It's detached from reality. If someone looks like a man, has XY chromosomes, is male, and can father a child, to say that no, he's not male because he has bad acne, it's a lie in pursuit of an agenda. Ann Fausto Sterling wanted to assert that male and female are not binary, that there's this big population of people who are both male and female. And so she's lying in pursuit of that political agenda. And the United Nations and the Biden administration, the New York Times follow that line for political reasons. But in truth, fewer than 2 in 10,000 humans are intersex. It is a very rare anomaly, roughly on the same order of magnitude as conjoined twins, what we used to call Siamese twins. We don't create a theory of personality based on Siamese twins. We recognize that two heads sharing one body is a very rare anomaly. It is not a ground for thinking about how personality develops, because indeed Siamese twins, two heads sharing one body, that's a very unusual situation. Likewise, intersex, a very rare phenomenon. Those unfortunate individuals certainly are deserving of care, should not be subjected to surgery as infants. But that's not grounds for saying that the binary, the division of the human race into male and female, is somehow called into question, any more than we would say that the division between day and night is meaningless, because there is such a thing as dusk and dawn and twilight. The existence of twilight doesn't render meaningless the division between day and night. The existence of intersex does not render meaningless the division between male and female.
So well said. Babies deserve the best, and that's why I love EveryLife.com. EveryLife.com is the pro-life diaper and wipes company that is serving moms and babies in need and have created best-in-class products for your little one. When you order from EveryLife.com, you're not only going to get a great diaper that is just as good or better than what you get on the shelves at the store, but you are supporting a company and partnering with a company that fuels the pro-life movement. In fact, just recently, EveryLife donated 1,700 boxes of diapers with my organization Live Action directly to moms in need to help them with their babies. I love this company. I love the heart behind this company, and you're going to love the products. It's everylife.com, and use the code Lila at checkout for 10% off your order. There's some recent studies out that seem very troubling. 1/4 to 1/3 of Gen Zers or millennials, depending on the study, identify as LGBTQ, whatever other numbers or plus or whatever. And many of them in that pocket, it's not just lesbian or gay anymore. It's a lot of trans, non-binary.
Well, it is. There's certainly a growing number of trans, but so for the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, the most recent iteration, this is more than 12,000 adolescents interviewed nationwide in a demographically representative sample. 38% of teenage girls said they are not straight. So they're lesbian, gay, bisexual, questioning, and a few are trans, but most of them are saying they're not straight. Now, having talked with these girls, I can tell you that many of them are running away from something rather than running towards something. They are repulsed by the idea of being a straight girl, and for good reason. Because contemporary American popular culture, by which I mean the culture of WAP, of Cardi B, of Megan Thee Stallion, of Bruno Mars and Drake, is a culture that teaches girls that it's a girl's job to get on her knees and give oral sex to boys at 15 years of age. And many girls are really turned off by that. And I can tell you about 16-year-old boys demanding anal intercourse from their 15-year-old girlfriend because this boy's been living on pornography for the last 3 years. And he says, yeah, women love it. No, they don't. No one has explained to that boys those are actresses being paid to pretend.
And often drugged.
That they enjoy it. Newsflash, most girls don't enjoy anal intercourse. Or as one teenage girl said to her boyfriend when he proposed anal intercourse, she said, yeah, how about if we try shoving something hard up your behind, see how you like it? But again, many parents are clueless. They don't realize that their son has a smartphone. At 13 years of age, he has unlimited access to pornography. He doesn't need a credit card. He just needs to say that he's 18 and he can access anything. And this is a real problem. We have, almost every culture of which we have any knowledge has taken male-female relations seriously and has limited and governed and guided how girls and boys get together. We no longer do that. And the result is a culture of boys who have learned about sex from porn videos at 16 years of age, expecting the girl to get on her knees and give oral sex to the boys. And the girls are getting tired of it. And that, in my judgment, as a family doctor, is the primary factor driving this explosion in the proportion of young girls who say, I'm not straight. Or as one young woman said to me, she said, I don't care if I never see another penis as long as I live. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it. We have lost any clue as to how to teach boys to be gentlemen, how to teach girls and boys to engage in romance rather than hooking up. Hooking up is the opposite of romance. And the result is a growing proportion, 38% of girls who say, I'm not sure what I am, but I'm not a straight girl because I don't want to do it.
Do you see that, I'm not sure what I am, but I'm not a straight girl, a journey of, I don't know, that it becomes pathologized to the point where she all of a sudden so hates being a woman, having a woman's body, that she considers or she thinks she may be trans? And then, I mean, I just see this anecdotally.
So if you
girls just hating their
Google
bodies.
my name and WAP, are we allowed to say what WAP stands for?
I mean, I think the audience is familiar with the
WAP
the song.
was a hugely popular video starring Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion, as well as a cameo by Kylie Jenner. It stands for Wet Ass Pussy, where these two women sing that they want to be tied up, they want to choke on a man's penis. And this video not only was #1 most popular video in the United States, broke all kinds of records for downloads, 93 million downloads in 1 week, but was also praised in the New York Times, in the Wall Street Journal, as empowering women. And this is so great that women are now telling us what they want. Well, what's a girl supposed to think when she sees that the most popular video in the country is two young women saying how they want to choke on a man's cock, they want to be tied up, handcuffs.
It's basically assault.
And some girls are saying, yuck. That is not me. But hey, the New York Times, Teen Vogue, and the Wall Street Journal all say this is great. Well, you know what? Maybe I'm not a girl then, because this is not me. Maybe I'm something else. Maybe I'm a boy. Because certainly the idea of being tied up and choking on a man's cock doesn't appeal to me. But according to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Teen Vogue, it should. So, forget that. I'm going a different way.
Have you seen a connection between a rejection of basically the sexual objectification, pornification that girls are experiencing? In addition, add on the fact that after puberty and just generally speaking, you have body image issues where girls don't like their bodies, generally speaking anyways, or they're overweight, or they struggle with just body acceptance. And so you have this lethal combo of the sexualization piece where they're rejecting that. They don't want to be seen that way. And then they also are uncomfortable in their bodies. And so could that create a perfect storm for saying, well I'm just going to
I don't know.
You're
sounding awfully 2007.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because
what happened in 2007?
Well, 15 years ago, 16 years ago, 20 years ago, you could make a plausible case that, hey, magazines, there used to be magazines back then like Teen Vogue and Cosmo Girl that depicted these slender models. And you would go to the department store, go to Target, and you'd see big posters of slender models. That's very 2007. You go to Target now and you see a lot of fat women as the models, and that is by design. And
do you think they're actually
body
happy
positivity.
Being fat? I think that's what I'm probing at here, because I agree with you. It's not like be fat, you're going to be happy and great. But do you think they're actually happy and great?
It varies. Everyone is different. I have met slender girls who are miserable, and I've met fat girls who are happy. I am not persuaded by your implied claim that girls who are not slender today uniformly torture themselves. There are certainly some who do, without a doubt.
To be clear, it's not just girls that are not slender. It's generally girls that struggle with, eating disorders is sort of you'd say you have an eating disorder, but they struggle with body image. And they could be very skinny, they could be very fat, but they are not happy with their bodies.
Yeah,
that
but I don't think that's
timeless,
new.
A timeless issue.
I don't think that's new. I think that's certainly been with us for at least the last.
I guess what I'm saying, when I was a girl, and struggling, I struggled with body image issues. I had an eating, disordered eating at one point. A lot of other girls I knew had that. Today's average girl, we still have tons of eating disorders today, but now you have this additional option if you're struggling with your body and with food of exploring being trans as a way to deal with your not body dysmorphia, but your actual body, your anorexia or your bulimia.
Yeah. So the question we're grappling with is why this explosion in the number of young women who say they're men, the number of teenage girls who say they're boys. And I think that you have proposed a reasonable hypothesis, namely that one of many factors driving this is that this is now an option for that girl who's unhappy with her body. That, hey, if I was a boy, it wouldn't matter. We have something pretty ancient in our civilization that says that how you look is really important if you're a girl and not important if you're a boy, or much, much, much less important. And that is not at all new. So when I talk to students or teachers about this topic, I often cite The Lord of the Rings. So The Lord of the Rings has only a few female characters. The books, not the movies. The books have only a few female characters who have names, and they're all described as staggeringly beautiful. Éowyn is amazingly beautiful. Arwen's amazingly beautiful. The Lady of Lothlorien is amazingly beautiful. There are other women, but they are unmentioned. The only women who are mentioned are amazingly beautiful. Well, the heroes of the story, Frodo and Sam, aren't attractive. They're not big. They're not strong. Frodo, Sam, Pippin, Merry, males, aren't anything at all special to look at. One of the unintended messages of The Lord of the Rings is that if you're a man, it doesn't matter what you look like. But if you're a woman, it's essential that you be beautiful. If you're not beautiful, you're nobody, literally. There is no named character.
You didn't even make it to the book.
You don't even get a name. So that's nothing new, okay? Tolkien wrote those books in the 1940s. We have a long history in Western civilization of prioritizing looks for girls. And for boys, it's who you are. For girls, it's how you look. There's nothing new about that, unfortunately.
Where does that come from?
Oh, my goodness. That's very ancient. Now, I am not an anthropologist, but I have consulted with real anthropologists who have found something similar in other cultures. Not necessarily in all other cultures, but in many other cultures. So certainly there's something about our species that prioritizes looks for girls and women and achievement for boys and men. So for boys and men, it's important to do. And for girls and women, it's more important to look good. And that is immensely toxic for girls and women. But that is not new, is my point. There's nothing new about that. You have suggested that maybe that's part of what's driving girls to be trans. And I've pushed back a bit because the trans thing is very new. It's really new. 20 years ago, when I wrote the first edition of Why Gender Matters, there's like 2 sentences on transgender. 30 years ago, just 30 years ago, the American Psychiatric Association estimated the prevalence of transgender. They said it's so rare, it's hard to say, but we think it's 1 in 30,000 men and fewer than 1 in 100,000 women. That was the American Psychiatric Association exactly 30 years ago, 1994. And now we've got, easily 4% of teenage girls in this country saying they're trans. Well,
14% of teenage girls.
4% of teenage girls say they're trans.
saying they're
38% of teenage girls say they're not straight. So going from basically 0 to 4% in 20 years, it's hard for me to say, oh yeah, that's because of the toxic effects of body positivity, because we've had a toxic culture with regard to body positivity.
Well, it would be the
forever.
toxic effects of body idol worship. I mean, when it comes to appearance,
well,
and
I think
not so
there's
much positivity
there are
versus
other
negativity.
factors driving this explosion in
girls.
trans identification for girls and boys.
What would you say those are?
All right, so how much time do we have left?
We'll go at least. We'll go 10 more minutes at least.
All right, so the first edition of my book, Why Gender Matters, had almost nothing on trans. The second edition has 12 chapters, the last 4 of which are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex. And I dive deeply into this question of why. Why this explosion in the proportion of kids who say they're trans. Almost every culture of which we have substantial knowledge has taught girls to be women, has taught boys to be men. What does that mean? Well, it actually means something different in each culture. And in the Japan of the Tokugawa shogunate, 1603, it meant something very different than it means for us today.
Are there core through lines, though, for all cultures?
Well, one example I give is the meticulous preparation and serving of tea. In 1603 in Japan was exclusively the province of men. Women were not even permitted to attend tea ceremony. And making it look good and doing it just right was taught by men to boys. Now, in our culture, in 21st century America, meticulous care in the preparation of serving in tea, we would tend to think is more of a feminine trait than a masculine trait. How cultures construct masculinity and femininity does vary quite a bit from one culture to another, with a few exceptions. So training in the skills required to kill other humans is exclusively male in essentially every culture of which we have any knowledge. There are only mythological exceptions like the Amazons. So training humans to kill other humans is almost exclusively male. But almost every other domain you look at, whether it's cooking or clothing, you can find a culture where men dominate and where those are masculine occupations.
But not to interrupt here, but I want to interrupt here because childbearing is an exclusively female domain. Mm-hmm. Obviously, men can be very involved with children, and they should be, I believe, but childbearing is exclusively female. So you say what's across cultures, across time, for men, it's being trained to kill. For women, is it fair to say being trained to basic training on mother?
The question we're trying to figure out is what's driving the explosion of trans. And one of several answers, it's not just one answer, but one of several answers I give in those final 4 chapters of Why Gender Matters is we no longer teach girls to be women and boys to be men.
And so I'm asking, what does it mean through cultures across time?
It means you have a community of men for boys and a community of women for girls. So Robert Putnam at Harvard spent decades leading an army of graduate students across the United States documenting that 50 years ago, you had a community of women for girls. Well, how does he document that? Well, he goes to Lake Forest, Illinois, and bowling. Bowling used to be a lot more popular in the United States, but more importantly, from Dr. Putnam's perspective, most of the bowling 50 years ago was in bowling leagues. And Tuesday night might be the women's night, and Thursday night was the men's night. And he and his students dig up, all right, who was in the bowling league in Lake Forest, Illinois in 1970? Well, let's see. On this team, there was a 53-year-old woman, a 37-year-old woman, a 26-year-old woman, a 17-year-old girl, and a 12-year-old girl. People in the United States still go bowling, but they go bowling alone, to borrow the title of Dr. Putnam's best-known book, meaning not literally alone, but instead of this 17-year-old girl going bowling with a community of women, she's going bowling with a bunch of 17-year-olds, girls and boys mixed together, which as far as Dr. Putnam is concerned is bowling alone. When Dr. Putnam uses the term community, he means bonds across generations, and the bonds across generations have been broken. We used to have a community of women for girls. We used to have a community of men for boys. We don't anymore. We set kids adrift in the culture of Instagram and TikTok to figure out for themselves what they're supposed to be, and the result is they are confused. And that confusion, I assert, is one of several factors driving this explosion in girls who say they're boys and boys who say they're girls.
It's so fascinating. What is so powerful about intergenerational community?
Oh my gosh. That
Why
is
it so
core to
necessary?
the human experience. Look, what is childhood for? Literally, what is childhood for? A 4-year-old horse is a mature adult. The Kentucky Derby is raced with 3-year-olds. A 4-year-old human is barely begun. Humans are children or adolescents for more years than most animals live. It can't just be about biological maturation, because a 4-year-old horse is a mature adult and it's a bigger animal than a human. So why? Humans are developing, children or adolescents, for more years than most animals live. Why? We don't have to guess. We have scholars like Dr. Melvin Conner at Emory, who wrote this 800-page monograph published by Oxford University Press titled The Evolution of Childhood, comparing development in our species with development in other species, especially other primates. And the answers the scholars give is that human development takes as long as it does because it takes many years for the grown-ups to teach the grown-up culture to the children. That's what makes us unique as a species. That's what's programmed in our DNA. So on the next page in my book, The Collapse of Parenting, where I present this research, I cite a column by Jennifer Finney Boylan, a longtime columnist for the New York Times. And she wrote about enlightened parenting. And in her column, she says that enlightened parenting means setting your child free to discover for themselves their own right and wrong. And if in so doing your child becomes a stranger to you, then so be it, quote, unquote. That might sound enlightened to some, but it's not enlightened. If you set your child free to discover for themselves their own right and wrong, and then have a device with internet access, what they will discover is Cardi B, WAP, Megan Thee Stallion, Drake, mainstream pornography, and confusion about gender. That New York Times advice to set your child free to discover for themselves their own right and wrong is not only an abdication of parental responsibility, it is profoundly unhuman. It's not what we are programmed to do. It's not what's in our DNA. It's not why human development takes as long as it does. Human development takes as long as it does because we're supposed to have strong bonds across generations for the grown-ups to teach the kids. And almost every enduring culture, every culture that lasts has those bonds. And I say that having consulted with the comparative anthropologists, which I did for my book, Boys Adrift. And they will tell you that every culture that lasts is characterized by strong bonds across generations, a community of men for boys, a community of women for girls. We used to do that. As recently as 50 years ago, we had the sewing circles. Dr. Putnam and his colleagues document, the sewing circle in Shaker Heights, Ohio, organized not by kin relation, but by geographic proximity, which is a fancy way of saying that the girls and women in that sewing circle weren't related to each other. They just happened to live on the same block. There were innumerable mechanisms as recently as 50 years ago in the United States to have bonds across generations, women with girls, men with boys. Dr. Putnam's got pictures of guys working under the hood of a car 50 years ago, and his students figure out who are the men and boys in those photographs, whether we're older men, younger men, and boys. You go out today and drive around on a Saturday afternoon, you just might see two old geezers working under the hood of their 65 Corvette, but the boys are not with them. The bonds across generations have been broken. As a result, we have a lot of confused boys, a lot of confused girls who have no idea what it means to be a man, because we no longer have a community of men for boys, a community of women for girls. When I speak to churches, I share what I have learned visiting churches across this country. A few churches still get it. So I show a flyer from a church youth group. Come to the pizza party and hang out and have fun. Bzz, that's not what kids need. what a girl needs to become a woman of faith is different from what a boy needs to become a man of faith. Boys need a community of men. Girls need a community of women. Now, I am not a fan of the Mormon religion, which I regard as very bizarre, but they get this. Every Sunday in the Mormon church, the girls go with the women, the boys go with the men, and the Mormon church is thriving. And I think a big reason it's thriving is because they get this. Most churches in the United States, Catholic and Protestant, do not get this. And as a result, many of those congregations are dwindling.
There's a lot of fear, I think, from, whether it's Gen X to the Gen Zer or it's the boomer to the millennial, of, not of misunderstandings or wounds from how the person was raised and now they're not at peace with their parents. So there's just a lot of division amongst the generations that I think is beyond just there's not good social structures.
Well, it's hardwired that girls need a community of women and boys need a community of men. And I always welcome the opportunity to speak to churches because they are uniquely well situated to create those communities. And I share examples of how other churches have done it and are doing it.
So what I'm going here with is there is perhaps fueling some of the disintegration of the generations. There's this generational divide where people look down on their parents. I think it's become more in vogue for people to not want to talk to my parents because of the way they hurt me or because of our differences, and people are more drawn to their peer group. Is this something that you're seeing as well?
Well, sure, and that's of course a main phenomenon driving my book, The Collapse of Parenting, which is not just documenting the collapse of parenting, but the main point of the book is to give parents some concrete pointers to prioritize the family, to recreate those strong bonds across generations.
Do you think that the school structure today, the 8 sometimes hours, you're with a peer group, you're not with your family, then you go hang out and do sports with your peer group, then on the weekends you're hanging with your peer group, there's just less physical time kids are spending with extended family with different ages?
No, I don't buy that.
You don't buy that?
The structure of the school day is not radically different today than it was 40 years ago. But parenting has collapsed over the last 40 years. So I do not blame it on the organization of the school day. I blame it on American popular culture more, if I have to blame it on anything.
But 100 years ago, the schoolroom was a mixed age group, right?
100, yeah. If you go back more than 100 years ago, when very few Americans, the majority of Americans, did not go to high school. But I don't think that's a useful lesson for us. The structure of the school day, again, has not changed radically in the last 40 years, but there has been a collapse of parenting over the last 20 years, actually. And that's the focus of my book, The Collapse of Parenting.
So much more we could talk about. I have one more question, and it might lead to a little secondary question, but so much of what you're saying begs this question for me, and it's kind of what we were discussing earlier. What are the differences between men and women culturally that have cultural ramifications? So what I mean by that is, you said, in this Japanese culture, the men were the ones serving the tea, and you see all these different activities that might be stereotypically male or female, but they will flip based on the culture or the time.
They'll change. I don't know that I'm not comfortable with the word flip.
Maybe they won't flip.
But they change. Every culture
change.
Constructs masculinity and femininity differently.
But you named one thing that is set across cultures and times for men, which is to kill, or to be trained to protect. Really,
Training
let's say.
in killing other humans is predominantly male in every culture of which we have substantial knowledge that's not mythological.
And what would be that activity or the activities that are across time and cultures for women?
Bearing and nurturing very young children.
So when I think about the gender differences, and there's a lot of arguments in tradcon, left wing, red pill, all of these different ideas about what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, is it fair to boil it down? And you look at the trappings and of what culture kind of builds up around being a man or woman. You boil it down, though, women can bear children, very young children, men can't. And men then can protect the whole project of the woman bearing the child.
I don't know.
What do you think of that?
No, I'm not comfortable with it. So again, one of the points I make in Why Gender Matters is that 50 years ago, the early gender theorists believed that gender was on a continuum. You could be very masculine, you could be very feminine. It was a single, one-dimensional continuum. And if you were more masculine, then you were necessarily less feminine. That turns out simply not to be accurate. Gender is two-dimensional. You can be masculine or not. You can be feminine or not. You can be both, which is androgynous. You can be neither, which is undifferentiated. So gender is a two-dimensional space, and part of becoming an adult who's comfortable in your own skin is figuring out where you belong on that two-dimensional space. So, for example, I've been married for 34 years. In my marriage, I do all the grocery shopping because my wife hates to shop for groceries. She hates to make supper. She loves it when I make supper, or neither of us make supper, and we make some other arrangement. She doesn't like to cook. She doesn't like to shop. She mows the lawn. She fixes the lawn tractor, which I would have no idea how to do. But I'm a straight man. She's a straight woman. We're comfortable as men and women. We may be a little gender atypical in that I love to shop for groceries. I love ballet. She doesn't really care for ballet, and she'd rather mow the lawn. And that's fine.
Well,
that's fine.
To be clear, what I was saying earlier is actually agreeing with what you just said, that we overemphasize these traditionally feminine versus masculine activities when we get away from the core that matters, which is that the through line for men is this protect thing, this train for war thing, and the through line for women is they can only bear the children. Those are really the fundamental differences that matter if we're going to talk about gender.
Well, I think one
fair?
place that we're failing is failing to teach girls and boys that the division of the human race into male and female is real. It's not a social construct.
But it's real to what end? It's real to the procreative end.
It's real. Again, tomorrow night at J. Sarah, I'm going to go over these differences with the parents. It's real in the sense that
you can book Dr. Sax on his website.
Girls and boys see differently. They hear differently. They differ profoundly in how they detect odors. For many odors, a woman has a sense of smell that's 100,000 times more sensitive than a boy or a man. So a man and woman walk into a room and the woman says, "Oh my gosh, it stinks, I'm going to throw up." And the man says, "I don't smell anything." And they don't understand each other because the woman's like, "What do you mean you don't smell anything?" He says, "I don't smell anything," because no one has explained to them that gender matters. These differences are real.
I'll try one more time to see if we may align here at all. We're with my current working theory, which is that all of these differences that we're talking about, that we've talked about today, let's say many of them, I'm not going to say every single one, but many of them are connected back to, when you go way back to the biological difference between a man and a woman, that men father and women mother. And the way that those things happen fundamentally are different. And so many of these other traits are connected back to empowering the mother to mother well and the father to father well. Fair or not fair?
Evolutionary biologists are struggling to understand why these differences make sense. Why would it confer evolutionary advantage for the man to smell less well? There is no consensus right now among the scholars as to why these differences have evolved. And in the absence of that consensus, I cannot endorse your conjecture. It's a conjecture, but it's not. When I speak to parents, it's evidence-based parenting. And look, we may not be able to say with certainty why these differences are there, but I think it's very important for parents to know about the differences, because the woman is saying to her son, "How can you stand it in your bedroom? It stinks." And the son says, "I don't smell anything."
I'm going to push back a little bit, Dr.
And
Sax.
mom thinks her son is being defiant and disrespectful. He's not.
Of course.
He really doesn't smell anything. Mom needs to know
going
that.
back to the original example, the girl wants to play with a doll. The girl put her trucks into a bed to sleep. And the boy wants to, he's tactile, he's movement, he's conflict, he wants to move things and shake things up, right? Isn't it fair? You don't need an evolutionary biologist to tell you that the girl's instinct to want to nurture the doll and to notice the details of the doll and to nurture the truck, and the boy's instinct to, prepare himself basically for the conflict of all these activities that he can design with them, can connect back very, very directly over time to the girl's ability to mother and need to mother a tiny, tiny little infant, and the boy's perhaps a relationship to want to protect or create structures to support that activity that's so fundamental to the future of the human race.
Okay.
Is it fair?
It's fair.
Okay. Well, we'll have to revisit this, but thank you, Dr. Sax, for joining the podcast. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Lila Rose podcast. Check out Dr. Leonard Sax's work and his book at the link in the bio. I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, don't forget, you can email me or you can message us. We love hearing from you guys on the show. My email is lila@gtbmedia.com. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast, or if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you are subscribed and ring that notification bell. We'll see you next time.